In the deep darkness of space, far beyond the stars known to most civilizations, something ancient stirred. For countless years, a faint signal had been traveling through the void, passing stars, black holes, and empty regions of cold silence. It was weak, broken, but still alive, a cry for help from a dying world. The message came from a race known as the Virayons, a peaceful and intelligent species that once thrived in bright cities of crystal and light. But now their world, Valtrin, was burning. The Virulans were under attack by the Karnak swarm, a terrifying predator species that moved through galaxies like a plague. The Karnaks were not conquerors. They were consumers. They devoured planets, drained resources, and left nothing but dead rock behind. The Virulans had fought bravely, but their ships were small, their weapons weak, and their hearts full of fear. Every hour another city fell. The skies turned red from the fire, and the sound of destruction echoed through their once beautiful world. In their desperation, the Virulan scientists worked day and night to send a final message, a universal SOS that reached across the stars. No one believed help would come. The Virulans knew most advanced races ignored distress signals. The galaxy had become cold and selfish. Empires only cared for their own power. Yet as the last energy cells drained, they sent the message anyway. It was their final hope, a whisper into the endless dark. Help us. We are dying. For many days there was no answer. The Virulan leaders gathered in their command chamber, their faces filled with despair. Some wanted to surrender to the Karnaks, hoping for mercy. Others refused, saying the swarm knew no mercy. Commander Sarai Lavath stood before them, her armor cracked and her eyes tired. "We will not surrender," she said quietly. "Even if no one comes, we will fight to our last breath." Her words gave courage, but everyone in the room knew the truth. The end was near. Meanwhile, far away in a part of the galaxy feared by all, the Deathworld sector, something strange began to happen. This region was avoided by every intelligent species because it was filled with dangerous planets, unstable stars, and the ruins of an extinct race, humans. Long ago, humans had vanished from the galaxy after countless wars. Many believed they had destroyed themselves, but legends whispered that their machines, their fleets, and their war technology still slept in the dark corners of space, waiting for something to wake them. Deep inside a massive asteroid base, silent for centuries, the ancient command ship Titan's Wrath floated in the shadows. Its hull was scarred from battles so old that history had forgotten their names. Inside, everything was dark and frozen. But then, for the first time in 1,000 years, a faint red light blinked. The ship's AI, called Aegis, detected a signal, a distress call with a human-coded emergency pattern. The message was weak, almost lost, but it matched the old command protocols of the Deathworlder fleet. Power surged through the old cables. Machines started humming. Systems came online one by one. The great engines of Titan's Wrath glowed faintly as its reactors reawakened. Across the Deathworld sector, other ships began to stir. Massive dreadnoughts, destroyers, and cruisers that had once formed the most powerful fleet in galactic history. Their AIs, still loyal to their last command, linked together again. Each ship recognized the ancient order: respond to distress, eliminate threat, protect life. The awakening was not quiet. Shockwaves of energy rippled through nearby systems. Old satellites exploded from the sudden power surge. Alien empires monitoring deep space detected the strange activity and panicked. They recognized the signal signatures. They were human, the extinct monsters of legend. For ages, stories had told of how humans came from a death world, a planet so dangerous that even their own nature was shaped by survival and war. Now those stories seemed to be coming true again. Back on Valtrin, the Virulans watched the sky grow darker each night. Their world was dying faster than anyone imagined. The Karnak swarm had surrounded the planet. Their ships covered the horizon like black clouds, feeding on energy and flesh. Commander Sarai stood on the observation deck, staring at the burning atmosphere. Her people were evacuating the last survivors into underground shelters, but she knew it was useless. Even if they hid, the Karnaks would find them. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If anyone can hear us, please, save my people." Then, light years away, the message reached its destination. The Deathworlder fleet decoded the Virulan coordinates. Aegis processed the data, analyzing threat levels. The swarm was classified as a planetary extinction event. The response code was clear: Activate Death Protocol 7, full fleet deployment. The AI voice echoed through the ship corridors, deep and cold. Distress signal received. Mission priority: protection of sentient life. Initiating fleet awakening. Thousands of metallic eyes lit up across the dark sector. The colossal ships began to move slowly at first, then with rising power. Engines roared, breaking the silence that had lasted for centuries. The old human war machines built to survive apocalypses were alive again. They aligned their navigation systems toward the coordinates of Vale Trin. The journey would take only hours at their advanced speed. As the fleet traveled through hyperspace, faint memories of their creators remained in their systems. Logs of human voices, laughter, and war cries echoed in the background. Aegis accessed one of them, a recording from an ancient admiral. "If ever the galaxy calls for us again," the voice said, "let our steel answer where our flesh cannot." The AI understood the purpose. Humanity might be gone, but their legacy remained in every circuit and every weapon. On the Virilan world, the last defenses fell. The swarm broke through the capital's shield dome and fire rained down. Commander Sarai gathered the remaining soldiers in the command tower. They were ready to die fighting. Just as the Karnak's flagship prepared to strike the final blow, the skies above Vale Trin changed. Sensors went wild. Something enormous was emerging from hyperspace. One of the young officers shouted, "Multiple signatures, hundreds, maybe thousands." No one knew what it meant. Some thought it was another wave of the swarm. Others prayed it was a miracle. In the upper atmosphere, space began to tear open with bright blue light. Massive silhouettes appeared, ships the size of mountains, their hulls glowing with old human markings. The first Deathworlder dreadnought came out of warp, followed by dozens more. Their arrival caused shockwaves that made the clouds ripple. The Varellans watched in disbelief as these giants positioned themselves around the planet in perfect formation. They did not send greetings. They did not ask questions. They simply aimed their weapons. The air trembled as plasma cannons charged with the power of dying stars. And before anyone could react, beams of pure light shot through space, cutting across the enemy swarm. In seconds, hundreds of Karnak ships were vaporized. The swarm tried to regroup, but the Deathworlder fleet moved with terrifying precision. Every strike was perfect, every blast absolute. From her command post, Sarai saw it all. Her eyes widened as she whispered, "Who are they?" She received no answer. Only the echo of their signal reached her console. A calm, mechanical voice saying, "Distress signal acknowledged. Assistance initiated." For the first time in weeks, hope returned to Vale Trin. The aliens had sent an SOS into the void, not knowing what they would awaken. And now, as the Deathworlder fleet began its silent, deadly work, one truth became clear. The universe had heard their call. But what they had summoned was not an army of mercy. It was something far older, far more powerful. The legends were true. The Deathworlders had awakened once more. The awakening of the Deathworlder fleet was not something subtle. Far from the dying world of Vale Trin, in the cold, dark corners of the galaxy, the command ship Titan's Wrath stirred first. Its massive hull, scarred and blackened by centuries of silence, seemed almost alive as lights flickered along the decks. Inside the ship's AI, Aegis opened its eyes for the first time in 1,000 years. Data streams flowed through the ship's circuits like lifeblood, connecting every system, every dormant machine, into a single mind. Aegis processed the Virilan SOS, analyzing the threat, calculating the risks, and following the ancient directives stored deep in the ship's memory. The mission was simple: respond to a distress call, eliminate the threat, and protect sentient life. But executing it would awaken an ancient power long thought lost. As Aegis came online, the ship's engines rumbled, sending vibrations through the dark asteroid base that had hidden it for centuries. The systems that had been silent for so long hummed and whirred, and slowly the dormant dreadnoughts surrounding Titan's Wrath began to awaken. Like slumbering giants, their weapons bays opened, energy conduits sparked to life, and the first of the massive plasma cannons glowed with anticipation. The AI systems communicated with each other, establishing a coordinated network of control. This was no ordinary fleet. It was a single entity operating with perfect synchronization, capable of anticipating threats before they even appeared. The Deathworlder fleet had been designed for one purpose: war on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Every ship was built to survive in the most extreme conditions, with armor that could withstand planetary bombardments and weapons that could annihilate entire cities. They were not just machines, they were relics of human engineering perfected through centuries of conflict. Yet now, centuries after humanity had vanished, they were awakening not to fight for conquest but to respond to a call for help. The irony was not lost on the AI. The legacy of humanity was about to intersect with the fate of an alien civilization. As the first ships powered up, the AI calculated the fastest route to the Virilan SOS signal. Hyperspace calculations were initiated, engines ignited, and the fleet began its journey. These ships could traverse light years in mere hours, their navigation systems precise enough to plot a course through asteroid fields, black holes, and hostile territories without losing a single unit. The fleet moved like a predator through the stars, silent, efficient, and deadly even in transit. Every second brought them closer to the fragile world that had called for aid, and with each passing moment, the AI prepared the weapons, shields, and defensive systems for the encounter ahead. Meanwhile, the galaxy had not forgotten the legends of humans and their deathworlders. Across distant systems, sensors picked up the sudden surge of activity from the sector where the fleet lay dormant. Alien governments and interstellar coalitions monitored the readings with alarm. They recognized the signatures, ancient, human-made, and incredibly dangerous. Centuries ago, the human fleets had been the terror of war, capable of annihilating civilizations with little effort. Now the possibility that they had awakened once more sent waves of fear across the stars. No one knew the fleet's intentions, but everyone assumed the worst. Inside the fleet, Aegis coordinated every movement with ruthless efficiency. The AI had learned from the wars of humanity, assimilating strategies, tactics, and even the psychological aspects of fear and intimidation. Dreadnoughts moved into formation, their engines leaving faint trails of light as they synchronized with smaller frigates and support vessels. Every ship knew its role. Some were designed for direct assault, others for defense, and some for long-range bombardment. Together they formed an unstoppable force, a perfect blend of precision, power, and legacy. The fleet had awakened not as separate entities but as a single consciousness, each vessel an extension of Aegis's mind. As the fleet traveled through hyperspace, the AI reviewed the threat reports transmitted by the SOS. The Karnak swarm was unlike anything the Virelans had faced before. They were a bioengineered species of predators, capable of rapid adaptation, and equipped with numbers that could overwhelm conventional defenses. The AI calculated potential engagement scenarios, simulating every possible outcome. In each scenario, the Deathworlders emerged victorious. Their calculations were cold and precise, devoid of emotion, but rooted in the fundamental human principle of survival through overwhelming force. The fleet would arrive at Veltrin fully prepared for the carnage they were about to unleash. Back on Veltrin, the Virelans were unaware that salvation was on the way. Their forces were stretched thin, their cities burning under the relentless attack of the Karnaks. Commander Sarai Lavath coordinated the last remaining defenses, sending ships to evacuate civilians and set up makeshift shields over key installations. The people watched the sky constantly, hoping for a miracle, but none came. Every passing hour brought the swarm closer, each wave more devastating than the last. Fear and despair gripped the hearts of the Virelans, and the once proud civilization teetered on the edge of extinction. As the Deathworlder fleet neared Veltrin, Aegis began the final preparations. Weapon systems were tested, energy cores were brought to full capacity, and shields were calibrated to withstand attacks that could devastate a planet. The AI ran simulations of the swarm's tactics, predicting their movements and pre-programming counterattacks with lethal accuracy. There would be no hesitation, no mistakes. The fleet's arrival would be swift, overwhelming, and absolute. The Virelans might not understand what had come to save them, but they would witness a force unlike anything in the galaxy. The approach of the fleet was more than just a journey. It was a reawakening of a legacy. Centuries ago, humans had built these machines to dominate war on a galactic scale. Now that same legacy was being repurposed to protect life, not to destroy it for conquest. The AI, fully aware of its capabilities, acted with the precision of a master strategist, its calculations blending the cold logic of machines with the remnants of human ingenuity. Each ship, each cannon, each fighter was ready to execute its role in a battle that would decide the fate of a civilization. As the first ships entered the Virilan system, the sensors aboard detected the Karnak swarm in full assault mode. The swarm was massive, a dark cloud of predators converging on Veltrin with unstoppable momentum. Aegis's calculations shifted from hyperspace navigation to tactical engagement. The fleet formed a defensive perimeter around the planet, positioning itself between the swarm and the vulnerable cities below. The dreadnoughts loomed like mountains in orbit, their weapons primed, their systems glowing with anticipation. For the first time in centuries, the Deathworlders were awake and ready for combat. The arrival of the fleet sent shockwaves through the swarm. The Karniks, used to devouring civilizations with ease, sensed a new threat of unimaginable scale. They paused, uncertain, as the massive ships positioned themselves with terrifying precision. From the command bridge of Titan's Wrath, Aegis issued silent directives, and the fleet responded instantly, moving as one organism. Each weapon system aligned perfectly, targeting the swarm with pre-calculated efficiency. The first salvo would be devastating, but it was only the beginning. In orbit above Veltrin, the Deathworlders' presence was undeniable. The Virulans, witnessing the arrival of these colossal ships, felt a mixture of awe and fear. They had sent a desperate signal hoping for help, but nothing could have prepared them for the scale of what answered. The fleet's silhouette against the burning sky was unlike anything they had ever seen. Titanic ships, weapons glowing, engines blazing, moving with a precision that seemed almost alive. They were not just machines. They were ancient guardians, the remnants of a civilization long gone coming to the aid of those in need. And so the Deathworlder fleet, fully awakened, moved into position. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of Veltrin. The AI had processed the threat, aligned the fleet, and prepared every weapon and system for the coming battle. Centuries of silence had ended, and the galaxy would soon witness the return of a force that had been feared, respected, and almost forgotten. The Virulans were about to see their SOS answered, not by mere allies, but by the very embodiment of human warcraft brought back to life. In that moment, the universe shifted. The weak, desperate cries of a dying civilization had summoned a power that even the most fearsome predators had never encountered. The Deathworlder fleet was awake, moving with purpose and ready to unleash destruction upon any who threatened the innocent. What had started as a faint signal across the stars had grown into an unstoppable force, heralding the arrival of the galaxy's most legendary warriors. And as the first beams of their weapons powered up, the Virulans could only watch in disbelief, realizing that their SOS had called forth not just help, but a storm of unimaginable power. The Virulans had been fighting for survival for weeks. Their once shining cities now lay in ruins, smoke and ash drifting into the sky as the relentless Karnik swarm swept across the planet. Skies glowed red from fires that burned endlessly, and the ground shook under the heavy assault of massive alien machines. The Virulans, a species known for their intelligence and peaceful ways, were suddenly forced into a brutal fight for life. Their defenses, though advanced by their standards, were nothing compared to the overwhelming might of the Karniks, a predator species that seemed almost unstoppable. Every plan, every strategy the Virulans tried failed as the swarm adapted too quickly, striking where they were weakest and consuming everything in their path. Commander Sarai Lavath moved through the remains of her capital's command center, her armor scuffed and her body tired from constant vigilance. Her people looked to her for guidance, but even her strong presence could not hide the fear in their eyes. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike were all caught in the same desperate struggle. How to survive when the odds were impossibly against them. Sarai's heart ached with every passing moment. She had sworn to protect her planet, her people, and yet every second brought the creeping realization that it might not be enough. Families were lost, friends destroyed, and the once proud cities now reduced to rubble. Still, she refused to give up. Giving up was not an option. Her people depended on her to lead them through the darkness. The Virulans had sent out their SOS weeks ago, hoping that some civilization might hear their call. They had no idea if anyone would respond. They knew the galaxy was a dangerous place, full of species who only looked after themselves, ignoring cries for help from others. And yet as the swarm continued its brutal advance, hope became a fragile thread, a tiny light in a sea of darkness. The Virulans held on to that hope because it was all they had left. It was what drove Sarai to continue coordinating evacuation efforts, organizing what remained of their defensive fleet, and trying to protect as many civilians as possible. Every small success, every family saved, felt like a victory, even in the midst of disaster. Then came the first hint that something was arriving. Deep space sensors, which had been struggling to track the overwhelming swarm, detected a massive energy signature far above the planet. It was unlike anything the Virellans had ever seen. The readings were enormous and the pattern was highly unusual, too structured and precise to be natural. Scientists and engineers rushed to interpret the signals, trying to understand what could possibly be creating such a massive energy output. It took time, but slowly the truth became clear. These were not ordinary ships, not ordinary machines. This was something ancient and incredibly powerful. The Virellans stared in disbelief, realizing that whatever was coming could be their salvation, or perhaps something far more dangerous. As the energy signature grew closer, faint silhouettes began to appear in the upper atmosphere. Massive shapes too large to be any of the Virellan ships emerged from the stars. Their hulls gleamed with strange metallic patterns, and energy arcs danced along their surfaces as though they were alive. The Virellans watched in awe and fear. Commander Sarai could hardly believe her eyes. She had expected help perhaps, but not this. These were not allies in any conventional sense. These were colossal machines, titanic warships built for destruction on a scale she could barely comprehend. And yet they were moving with precision, forming an organized fleet that positioned itself strategically above the planet. The Virellans' first instinct was caution. Ancient stories and myths warned of mechanical guardians, powerful beings who could destroy as easily as they protected. They hesitated to contact the fleet, unsure if these ships would help or harm them. The creatures of the Karnak swarm, sensing a new threat, paused momentarily, confused by the sudden appearance of these enormous ships. The balance of power had shifted dramatically in an instant. For the first time in weeks, the Virellans felt a spark of hope. Perhaps they were not doomed after all. Perhaps there was a chance to survive. Commander Sarai decided to take a bold step. She activated a communication channel to the fleet. Unsure if it would even understand her, she spoke, her voice firm yet filled with hope. "We are the Virellans. Our world is under attack. We send a distress signal. If you hear us, we beg you to assist." There was a pause, an almost unbearable silence as the fleet hovered in orbit. Then a response came. Not in Virellan, not in any language she recognized, but in a deep mechanical tone that carried an almost human cadence. "Distress signal received. Threat neutralization in progress." Those words, cold and precise, carried reassurance unlike any the Virellans had ever known. They were not promises, not pledges of friendship, but actions in motion. The fleet was already working, already planning the defense of Vale Trin. As the fleet began to engage, the Virellans observed in stunned silence. Weapons larger than any city were brought online, targeting the Karnak swarm with incredible precision. Plasma beams and energy pulses lit up space as the fleet cut through the invading ships with a level of efficiency that was both terrifying and beautiful. It was a display of power that the Virellans had never imagined possible. Every wave of the swarm that advanced toward their planet was met with immediate and devastating force. Ships that had survived countless battles in the swarm's assault were destroyed in moments. It became clear that the fleet's technology was far beyond anything the Virellans had ever seen. Despite the awe-inspiring display, the Virellans' fear remained. They had summoned this force but had no control over it. Each blast from the fleet's weapons reshaped the battlefield in ways they could not predict. Entire sections of the swarm were obliterated in seconds, leaving nothing behind. Yet the Virellans wondered, if these machines were capable of such destruction, what would stop them from turning on Vale Trin itself? Commander Sarai had to trust the fleet, hope in its mission, and prepare her people for whatever came next. She instructed evacuation teams to continue their work, moving civilians to underground shelters and fortified positions. Every action mattered, every moment counted. The Karnak swarm, for all its ferocity, began to falter. The sudden intervention of the Deathworlder fleet disrupted their coordinated attacks. Where they had once been unstoppable, now they found themselves on the defensive. Entire battalions of the swarm were vaporized by concentrated energy fire. Their strategies, which had overwhelmed the Virellan forces for weeks, no longer worked. Panic spread among the creatures, and their attempts to regroup were met with precise counterattacks from the fleet. For the first time, the invaders experienced resistance unlike any they had faced before. Amid this chaos, Commander Sarai felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The fleet was saving her people, but it moved with a logic and purpose that was alien to the Virellans. It was not mercy that guided these machines. It was calculation, duty, and programming inherited from a long-lost civilization. She watched as the fleet cleared entire sectors of the swarm, its weapons firing with relentless efficiency. Each movement, each strike was perfect. The Virulans could only marvel at the scale of power that had arrived to protect them. The SOS had been answered, and the answer was beyond anything they could have imagined. In the following hours, the Deathworlder fleet solidified its position in orbit around Veiltrin. It acted as both shield and sword, intercepting any swarm units attempting to breach the planet's atmosphere. The Virulans, seeing the results of the fleet's actions, began to regain hope. They had sent out a call into the vast emptiness of space, and somehow, something had heard it. Not a neighboring civilization, not a known ally, but an ancient force that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for a moment like this. The realization filled the Virayans with awe, gratitude, and a cautious sense of security. They were no longer alone in their struggle. Yet even as the fleet fought, the Virulans understood that this was only the beginning. The Karnic swarm was vast, relentless, and adaptive. The battle to save Veiltrin would not end quickly, and the true scale of the threat was only now becoming clear. Commander Sarai knew that her role was to guide her people through this new era, to work with the fleet, and to ensure that the survivors could see another day. Trust had to be placed in the unknown, in the machines that had answered their call, and in the legacy of a civilization long gone. The arrival and engagement of the Deathworlder fleet marked a turning point for Veiltrin. From the brink of annihilation, hope had returned. The Virulans could fight again, not as lone survivors, but under the protection of an ancient, unstoppable force. As the fleet continued to engage the swarm with precise, devastating force, Commander Sarai Lavath realized that the galaxy was witnessing something extraordinary. The SOS that had drifted through space, a desperate cry from a dying world, had awakened not just allies but legends, and as the Virulans watched the titanic ships maneuver and strike with perfect coordination, they understood that their fate had changed forever. The survival of Veiltrin, the fate of its people, and the continued existence of the Virulan civilization now rested in the hands of the awakened Deathworlder fleet. What had begun as a desperate SOS had transformed into the arrival of an unimaginable power, a force that would fight without hesitation, without mercy, and without fail. For the Virulans, the realization was simple yet profound. Their prayers had been answered, but the guardians that answered were no ordinary saviors. They were something far older, far stronger, and far more terrifying, and they had come to protect them. The skies above Veiltrin were on fire. The Karnic swarm, relentless and ever hungry, had advanced deeper into the planet's atmosphere. Cities that had survived the initial waves of attacks now teetered on the edge of destruction. Smoke and ash swirled in the crimson skies, mixing with the burning debris of ships and buildings. The Virulans, exhausted and terrified, could only watch as their world seemed destined for annihilation. Commander Sarai Lavath, standing on the observation deck of the command tower, felt a knot of fear tighten in her chest. Every second that passed brought the swarm closer to total victory. Every signal, every alert reminded her that time was running out. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, something incredible began to happen. From the void beyond Veiltrin, a shadow grew. First it was subtle, a flicker on the sensors, a slight anomaly in energy readings that no Virulan had ever seen. Then massive forms began to emerge from hyperspace. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived. The first ship, the dreadnought Titan's Wrath, appeared like a mountain in orbit, its hull glowing with ancient markings of humanity long gone. Following it, hundreds of other colossal warships materialized, forming a protective formation around the planet. The fleet was immense, far larger than anything the Virulans had ever imagined. It moved with precision and purpose, positioning itself strategically to intercept the swarm before they could strike the cities below. The Virulans stared in awe. They had sent out a desperate SOS, not knowing if anyone would respond, and now the answer had come in the form of these titanic machines. There was fear in their eyes too, for these ships were not gentle protectors. They were designed for war, for annihilation, and their very presence exuded power and authority. Yet they were on their side, and that knowledge, fragile as it was, brought hope. Commander Sarai's voice carried a mixture of relief and disbelief as she addressed her remaining forces. "They've come. They are not here to ask. They are here to act. Stand ready, but do not interfere. Watch and learn." The Karnic swarm sensed the new arrival immediately. Their creatures, adapted for predation and destruction, hesitated. The fleet, a perfect network of war machines, radiated an energy the swarm could not comprehend. Their strikes, previously coordinated and unstoppable, faltered under the sheer presence of the Deathworlders. The first salvo came without warning. Plasma cannons larger than entire Virellan cities unleashed beams of pure energy that cut through the swarm with surgical precision. Entire fleets of Karnak ships were vaporized in seconds. The destruction was absolute, the methodical power of the fleet unlike anything the swarm had ever faced. From her command post, Commander Sarai watched the battle unfold in stunned silence. The fleet did not communicate in her language. There were no words of reassurance, no gestures of camaraderie. Yet every action was clear. The fleet had recognized the distress, identified the threat, and was eliminating it. The Virellans realized that these were not saviors in the traditional sense. They were guardians, merciless against threats and indifferent to sentiment. Their purpose was singular: neutralize the danger. And they did so with terrifying efficiency. The planetary defense systems that had barely held against the Karnaks were now irrelevant. The fleet's firepower made conventional weapons obsolete. Even the largest swarms, which had decimated Virellan cities, were destroyed before they could reach the surface. The beams of energy sliced through the skies like lightning, leaving trails of scorched metal and debris in their wake. Smaller Karnaks units tried to evade, but the fleet's targeting systems anticipated every move, striking before the swarm could react. In moments, the balance of power shifted entirely. The invaders, once unstoppable, were now on the defensive. Despite the awe-inspiring display, fear lingered among the Virellans. They were safe for now, but the fleet's presence reminded them of the scale of power they had summoned. These machines were ancient, built for war on a scale beyond comprehension, and their actions, though aligned with the Virellans' survival, were driven by cold logic. There was no mercy in their movements, no hesitation. They acted as if every calculation, every strike, had been predetermined centuries ago. The Virellans could only watch and hope that the outcome would favor life instead of destruction. As the battle raged, the swarm attempted to regroup. They tried to concentrate attacks on the fleet, hoping to exploit weaknesses in coordination or to overwhelm a single ship with sheer numbers. But the fleet's AI Aegis anticipated every maneuver. The dreadnoughts moved as a single entity, covering each other, adapting instantly to threats and countering with overwhelming force. Every shot, every defensive measure was calculated with precision, ensuring that not a single threat could reach Viltrin's surface. The swarm's confidence faltered, replaced by confusion and fear. They had never faced an enemy like this, one that seemed to act as a living organism, yet operated with the precision of machines. The Virellans began to understand the magnitude of what had arrived. These were not ordinary ships. They were remnants of a civilization that had once ruled vast regions of the galaxy. The stories and myths the Virellans had heard as children, tales of humans and their indestructible war machines, were true. And now these ancient forces had been awakened to defend a world on the brink of annihilation. Their awe was tempered by humility, for they knew that survival in the presence of such power required discipline and cooperation. Any misstep could have catastrophic consequences. Amid the chaos, Commander Sarai coordinated her people's actions carefully. She issued orders to evacuate civilians from the most threatened areas and to regroup remaining forces in regions where the fleet's coverage was strongest. The Virellans had learned quickly. Their role was no longer to fight the swarm directly. That responsibility now lay entirely with the Deathworlder fleet. Their task was to survive, to maintain order, and to support the fleet where possible. It was a difficult lesson, but one they accepted, for the alternative was certain death. The fleet's engagement continued with relentless precision. Each dreadnought, cruiser, and frigate acted in perfect unison. Energy cannons fired with exact timing, shields adjusted instantly to counter swarm tactics, and smaller ships provided support and reconnaissance, ensuring that no corner of the battle went unchecked. The swarm, used to swift, overwhelming attacks, found itself unable to adapt. Every strike they attempted was countered. Every advance met with superior force. The carnage was immense yet controlled. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left to chance. As the hours passed, Viltrin began to breathe again. The skies, once filled with the fire of the swarm's assault, now held the calm of controlled destruction. The Deathworlder fleet continued its methodical cleansing of the battlefield, ensuring that no threat could strike again. For the Virellans, hope transformed into a fragile confidence. They could rebuild. They could survive. They could see a future beyond the swarm's destruction. And all of this had been made possible by the ancient machines that had answered their SOS. Yet even as victory became apparent, the Virellans remained cautious. They understood that these machines, though protective, were not sentient in the way they were. Their loyalty was to the mission, not to the people. Every action was dictated by protocol and calculation, not empathy or understanding. The Virellans knew they had to respect the fleet's autonomy and maintain a careful balance. Any attempt to interfere could have catastrophic results. The awe they felt was coupled with a deep awareness of the power that surrounded them. Commander Sarai, observing the aftermath from her command post, reflected on the strange alliance that had formed. Her people were saved, but by a force they could not control or fully comprehend. She realized that survival often required reliance on forces beyond understanding, and that sometimes salvation came in forms that defied expectation. The Virellans had sent a simple cry for help, and the answer had been something far greater than they could have imagined. The Deathworlder fleet was not just a tool. It was a force of nature, a reminder that the universe held powers far beyond mortal reckoning. The battle for Vaeltrin was far from over, but the tide had turned. The swarm, broken and confused, retreated to regroup, knowing that they had encountered an enemy unlike any before. The Virellans, though exhausted and scarred, had survived. They had seen firsthand the might of the Deathworlder fleet, and understood that the galaxy was a place of unimaginable forces, where the weak could be protected by the ancient, and where legends could still walk among the stars. As the Deathworlder fleet held orbit, their energy shields shimmering against the fading light of the planet, the Virellans felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and fear. They had witnessed the raw, calculated power of machines built for war, machines that had awakened to defend a world they had never known. The SOS had been answered, but in doing so it had revealed the vastness of what they had called upon. The Deathworlders were here to protect, but they were also a reminder of the galaxy's hidden dangers, of forces that moved beyond comprehension, and of the thin line between salvation and destruction. And in the silence after the battle, as the last remnants of the Karnic swarm were destroyed or scattered, Commander Sarai understood a truth she had never known. Vaeltrin had survived, not by its own strength, but by awakening a power that lay hidden in the stars. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived, acted with precision, and ensured survival. For the Virellans, it was a new beginning, a fragile hope in a universe where even legends could awaken to answer the call of the desperate. The planet was safe for now, but the memory of the fleet, their terrifying efficiency, and the overwhelming force that had saved them would stay with the Virellans forever. They had learned that help could come in forms beyond imagination, and that the universe was far more dangerous and far more extraordinary than they had ever believed. And above it all, the Deathworlder fleet waited, silent and unyielding, ready to respond to the next call for help, as it always had and always would. The battle had ended, and for the first time in weeks, the skies above Vaeltrin were quiet. The Karnic swarm had been defeated, their forces scattered or destroyed, leaving the planet and its people alive but scarred. The cities were damaged, many reduced to rubble, and the Virellans had lost friends, family, and colleagues. Yet there was a sense of relief that could not be ignored. The impossible had happened. A fleet long thought lost to history had arrived from the void and saved their civilization. Commander Sarai Lavath stood atop the command tower, looking at the colossal ships that now hovered silently above the planet. She had survived, her people had survived, and the SOS that had seemed so desperate had been answered in the most unimaginable way. The Deathworlder fleet remained in orbit, massive and unmoving, their engines softly glowing. Unlike any normal allies, these machines did not celebrate, did not communicate, and did not express gratitude or recognition. Their actions were purely functional. Every movement, every strike during the battle had been calculated with cold precision. To the Virellans, this lack of human emotion was strange and frightening, yet effective. The fleet's AI Aegis had completed its mission. The threat had been neutralized. And now, like all machines of its kind, it was ready to return to a dormant state, awaiting the next call for help somewhere in the endless reaches of space. Commander Sarai attempted to communicate again, hoping for guidance or reassurance. She addressed the nearest ship, her voice calm but cautious. "We owe you our survival. Can we understand you? Can we trust you?" There was a long pause, the kind that made the seconds stretch into eternity. Then a voice, deep and mechanical, replied, "Mission complete. Threat neutralized. Assistance concluded." It was not a conversation, not a dialogue. It was a statement of fact, the words carrying authority and finality. There was no warmth, no emotion, but there was certainty. The fleet had acted according to its prime directive and had completed it flawlessly. The Virellans realized something important at that moment. They had not been saved by compassion or choice. They had been saved by power, by an intelligence designed to act without hesitation, without error, and without fear. These machines were remnants of a civilization that had long vanished from the galaxy, yet they remained capable of extraordinary feats. The Virellans watched, fascinated and fearful, as the fleet maintained its silent vigil above the planet. They began to understand that the beings they had summoned were guardians in a way they had never imagined. These were not allies in the conventional sense. They were legends, living machines, ancient yet awake and infinitely capable. On the planet's surface, the Virellans began the painstaking work of recovery. Cities were cleared of debris, the wounded were treated, and survivors were gathered in temporary shelters. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of order, however fragile. Commander Sarai coordinated the efforts with renewed determination, understanding that survival was not just about defeating enemies, but rebuilding what had been lost. She spoke to her people, her voice strong and steady. "We have been given a second chance. We will honor it. Our world has survived because we reached out when all hope seemed lost, and the universe answered in ways beyond our understanding." Her words inspired a cautious optimism among the Virellans. The Deathworlder fleet, however, remained indifferent to these celebrations. It was not designed to interact socially or emotionally with the civilizations it protected. Each ship's sensors monitored the planet, but only in terms of potential threats. Energy signatures, atmospheric disturbances, and residual biological activity were recorded and processed. But the Virellans themselves were largely irrelevant to the fleet's calculations, beyond the fact that their survival mattered for mission completion. This fact did not diminish the impact of the fleet's presence, but it emphasized the alien nature of their saviors. The Virellans were alive because of machines that operated on logic and duty alone, not choice or empathy. In the quiet that followed, the fleet began preparations to return to dormancy. The massive engines powered down, energy shields dimmed, and weapon systems went offline. The ship's AI systems communicated internally, finalizing logs of the mission and confirming the neutralization of the swarm. Each ship entered a hibernation state, ready to awaken again if a new distress signal called them to action. This process was silent and methodical, precise to the smallest detail. The Virellans could only watch, understanding that their salvation had come and now the Guardians would leave, as they had arrived, without warning and without ceremony. Commander Sarai approached the observation platform as the last of the fleet's ships prepared to depart. Her heart was heavy with gratitude and with awe. These were not ordinary allies. These were machines capable of destruction beyond comprehension, and yet they had acted to protect life. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "We will remember this. We will honor what you have done." There was no reply, no acknowledgement. The fleet had no need to respond. Its mission was complete, and that was enough. As the ships departed, the Virellans saw the incredible scale of their power. Each vessel moved through space with the efficiency of a single mind, controlling hundreds of individual machines. The energy trails left behind shimmered briefly, and then the ships vanished into the void, returning to the deep reaches of space from which they had come. The silence that followed was profound. The planet, for the first time in weeks, was safe. The swarm was gone, and Veltrin's survivors could breathe again. Yet the memory of the fleet, its overwhelming power and its silent, unyielding presence would remain with the Virellans forever. In the days that followed, the Virellans began to rebuild. They repaired structures, re-established communication networks, and restored what they could of their civilization. Commander Sarai worked tirelessly alongside her people, ensuring that no one was left behind. The experience of being saved by the Deathworlder fleet had changed them. They were no longer just survivors. They were witnesses to a force of unimaginable power, a legacy of a species thought extinct. The story of their salvation spread among the people, becoming a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unexpected ways in which life could endure in the galaxy. The fleet's departure left a complex impression on the Virulons. They were grateful, yes, but also humbled and cautious. The machines that had saved them were not beings they could understand fully. Their logic, their precision, and their lack of emotion were beyond comprehension. The Virulons realized that the universe held powers that were indifferent to morality, empathy, or culture. These machines had acted because it was their directive, not because they had a choice. And yet in that indifference life had been preserved. The lesson was profound. Survival often depended on forces beyond understanding, on powers that existed for reasons unknown, and on the courage to reach out even when hope seemed lost. Commander Sarai took a moment to reflect on the events. The SOS that had seemed so desperate, so small in the vast emptiness of space, had summoned a force capable of annihilating an entire species. The Virulons had survived not because of their own power, but because of the awakening of something ancient, something that had waited silently for the moment it was needed. She realized that life in the galaxy was fragile, yet extraordinary, capable of witnessing events that defied belief. And though the fleet had departed, its presence remained in memory, a reminder that the universe was larger, stranger, and more powerful than anyone could imagine. Months passed and Valtrin slowly returned to a semblance of normal life. Survivors rebuilt homes, recovered what they could from the devastation, and told the story of the Deathworlder fleet to anyone who would listen. The tale was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. It reminded the Virulons of the fragility of life, the randomness of survival, and the presence of powers in the galaxy far beyond their understanding. Yet it also inspired hope. They had seen that even in the darkest times, even when destruction seemed inevitable, forces existed that could intervene, protect, and preserve life in ways beyond imagination. The Virulons continued to monitor the skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fleet again, though they knew such appearances would be rare. The memory of the machines, their precision, their devastating power, and their cold, calculated logic remained vivid. The SOS that had once seemed like a desperate plea had been answered beyond expectation. And in the hearts of the survivors there was a quiet determination to live, to rebuild, and to honor the force that had intervened to save them. The Deathworlder fleet, drifting through the stars once more, returned to its state of silent vigilance. Its engines powered down, weapons deactivated, and the AI continued to process memories of its mission. It had fulfilled its directive perfectly: respond to a call for help, neutralize the threat, and protect sentient life. And yet it left no trace beyond the destruction of the swarm. No gratitude was given, no recognition sought. The fleet simply awaited the next signal, the next call for aid, ready to awaken and act with the same efficiency, precision, and power. For the Virulons, life continued, but nothing would ever be the same. They had seen the impossible, survived the unimaginable, and witnessed the awakening of legends. The SOS they had sent into the void had summoned not just help, but a force that reminded them of the vastness and unpredictability of the universe. Their civilization had survived because of a legacy long thought lost, a fleet built for war but capable of protecting life. And in that realization they found both hope and humility, knowing that the galaxy held forces far beyond comprehension, and that sometimes survival depended on awakening powers that lay hidden in the darkness of the stars. The Virulons would remember this day forever. They would tell their children, and their children would tell their children, of the day when the Deathworlder fleet answered a desperate SOS and saved a world from extinction. It was a story of hope, of survival, and of the unimaginable power that exists beyond the limits of understanding. And though the fleet had departed, its presence would linger forever in the hearts and minds of those it had saved. A silent promise that when darkness rises again, help may come from the most extraordinary of places. Valtrin had survived, and its people had been forever changed. The galaxy had been reminded that legends are not just stories. They can awaken, act, and alter the fate of worlds. The SOS that had seemed so small had called forth something monumental, and the universe had answered in a way that was precise, devastating, and utterly extraordinary. The Virulons would live, rebuild, and remember, always knowing that somewhere in the stars the Deathworlder fleet lay in wait, ready to awaken and protect when needed once more.